holiday in New Zealand some years ago, 6 weeks traveling around. And the theme of the whole country was that the tourism department was 100% pure. And the efforts that were being done domestically were so impressive in looking after the environment, in looking after the economy, looking after the social situation of tourism. And I was very impressed with that. But now it seems that the message is not out there that these tourists, who are 5 million of them, insanely, coming in, are creating enormous issues with the flights to New Zealand, which is inevitable because of the long distances. But nobody seems to be too concerned about that. That does worry me a bit. And I was wondering what kind of international efforts would be needed to bring New Zealand aboard. I mean, Paul has talked about the NDCs, bringing international aviation into the NDCs, and things are starting to happen there. For example, the Climate Change Committee in the UK is strongly recommending it. The UK is saying it will include it as an idea for COP26 in Glasgow next year. So I was wondering, how do you think internationally we can get the sort of leverage, as it were, on a country like New Zealand to move this forward?
I think we've seen a little bit just through the so-called flight shame movement in Europe, that I think possibly some groups of people are not coming to New Zealand. I've seen the advertising campaigns. I've forgotten who it's by, but it's one of the Nordic countries where they had pictures of their fjords compared with New Zealand fjords and saying, well, why do you need to go this long distance to New Zealand? But even if Europeans don't come to New Zealand, the market that's opening up in Asia is just so huge. We see those airports that they're building in China, they're just massive. So we can replace the European tourists with Asian tourists. So we somehow have to work with those Asian economies and Australia, given that Australia is our biggest source of tourists. It's almost like domestic tourists coming from. But no, I've never been part of that international sort of world in a sense, apart from economics conferences and such like. So I really don't understand fully how it works. But New Zealand has taken international conventions very seriously. So I think if international pressure could be applied, we would start to see it. But, you talk about the clean green. I think it's probably more of a myth than you think, given that, we have real problems with water quality in our rivers. There's a whole range of things and we have the usual biodiversity problems. But I think we have to make tourism clean and green, and that includes, electric camper vans, electric cars, increasing the options of trains and buses in New Zealand, a whole range of things domestically. But unless we have decarbonised international aviation, then the clean green image is going to be a myth, and maybe that will work against us for the higher income tourists. I mean, maybe the lower income tourists don't really care about those things, but maybe the higher income tourists that we really want to attract, maybe they do care, and maybe they'll go to countries that do take it more seriously.
In other words, and I've been suspecting this, that we need to look at the originating markets, where the tourists come from, and imposing, whether it be frequent flyer taxes or carbon taxes or GST or whatever, on the originating markets rather than on the destinations, and getting those people, for example, in Australia, to say, well, hold on a minute, maybe we shouldn't be flying to New Zealand.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's both. I mean, New Zealanders are big travellers too. And one of the things that the COVID crisis has brought home is that, we estimate that something like 1 million New Zealanders live overseas. So we've got 5 million in New Zealand, but 1 million potentially live overseas at any one time. So we're huge travellers, and we've seen the outward travel just increased dramatically. So it's been both inward and outward travel. So we've got to work on, our New Zealand people, and I think a lot of them would be prepared to pay for higher fuel prices. But I think it's probably got to be through mandates. I mean, as I said earlier on, the offsets just didn't work. I mean, we were at about 2% offsetting, and a lot of those schemes were fairly dubious anyway. So it's both. It's the incoming people and the outgoing. I mean, one of the things that will happen, I think, is that some of the business travel may reduce because we've obviously got things like Zoom nowadays. But a lot of our businesses are under huge pressure now to show how sustainable they are. And that will be through accounting practices, just through reputational practices. So I think some of that business travel will be replaced with Zoom conferences. So, that will have an effect on the airlines because that will get rid of some of the higher yield passengers. So, yeah, I think it's a multi-dimensional thing. There's got to be pressure on every step of the way. But, little meetings like this are helpful in that it gets us discussing New Zealand's place internationally, and hopefully, other people will think about it and take it seriously.
Thanks very much, Paul. Could I ask you just one last question from me? I mean, it seems to me that the problem is not international travel and the problem is not flying. The problem is a particular fuel which happens to be dirty. And what I wanted to ask you as an economist, what economic tools could be used to get the airlines to clean up their fuel? So there's nothing wrong with aviation. The problem is the fuel they use to fly with.
Oh, well, we've talked about them. I mean, there's the taxes, the subsidies. If you're a really wealthy country, sure, you could throw a lot of subsidies into the fuel. We're not a wealthy country. I mean, we're a part of the OECD, but our productivity has been pretty poor in recent years, and we're struggling with housing issues, we're struggling with child poverty, we're struggling with those sort of things. So I don't think there'd be a lot of enthusiasm for throwing further subsidies at things like aviation. But some countries will be able to do that. I think there would be more enthusiasm for taxes, and especially there was very little opposition to the idea of having the tax coming in on tourists because that was someone else who paid it, not us. So I think there are options to do that, and I think the mandates of using fuel. I mean, I've seen it over my life in business, is that industries kick up a fuss when these sorts of things come in, but ultimately they adapt. They know how to do it, and the fact is, you're not asking them to do something that's just on the drawing board, as you've said early in the thing. This is a technology that we know about. We can do it. We can do it in New Zealand because we've done it. We produce, we've produced synthetic fuels in the past. I mean, admittedly from natural gas, but we have a lot of options. I mean, we're talking about waste to hydrogen. We've got a ton of electricity. We're one of the better countries in the whole of the world in terms of renewable energy. And the government, in fact, has said that they want to go to 100% renewables. We've got a heck of a lot of wind. We can put in more wind turbines. So, we could be a country that could actually lead the world in this. So, yeah, I'm really in favour of the mandate drop-ins and make it pretty steep curve, and the industry will emerge.
Can I just be clear why you're not enthusiastic about taxation?
Oh, because I'm watching the lead up to the election, and basically people don't want taxes. Even the party on the left is only just fiddling with the taxes on the higher income earners. So there's no appetite amongst the electorate for additional taxes. That's the problem I have. I mean, we've talked about a wealth tax in the past, a capital gains tax, and that was rejected. And our Prime Minister said that she won't discuss it again when she's in her term. So I just think I think you could slip in something like mandated drop-ins. It seems like a technical issue for business to solve, and they will solve it. Whereas taxation just gets into an absolute nightmare. I just don't think politically we could get it through. I mean, theoretically, I think it's a great idea, but the difference between theory and the electoral cycle are hugely different.
Paul, thank you very much indeed for that. It's been fascinating to listen to a proper economist's view on this. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you for inviting me. It's been great, and I really enjoy following your work, and I hope you keep going at it.
Thanks, Paul.